with Matt, we built in a way an authentic happiness. Educating between knowledge and ethics is the topic I want to present and discuss with you today. Well, talking about education, knowledge, and ethics and compare them sounds sufficiently reasonable to whoever is interested or involved in education, as instructor, student, even as a parent. Whereas accosting those terms and concepts to happiness and authenticity in a Lonerganian sense, of course, might require further elaboration. So my students would ask themselves, and they promised to be here, but they are not. That's fine. How is learning related to happiness? Usually, they don't think that. My first answer to this would be, my first answer to this would be paraphrasing Piero Viotto, that the purpose of education is the purpose of life. And if our purpose, our aim in life is authentic happiness, in a sense that I'm going to explain in a moment, we can't avoid to consider the relation and the correlation between education, knowledge, ethics, and our becoming authentic subjects, and therefore live a happy life. So I will start briefly with a brief definition of the concepts of happiness and authenticity, recalling Aristotle's and Lonergan's reflection. And then I will consider how Maritain outlines the idea of education in his Education at the Crossroads, idea that I summarize in a way as the challenge of freedom. In the third section, I consider Lonergan's outlines of the desire to know that is pervasive in our life. And I then move on to the ethical issue. Is ethics in education a set of rules to follow or a path towards authenticity? Finally, I go back to the opening statement. The purpose of education is the purpose of life, underlining how the education of the whole person should be at the core of our efforts. So I will be quick on Aristotle, but I have a lot of quotes just in case. Okay, then we will move on to Maritain and Lonergan. So, but just to give you the introduction, because this is where my reasoning, my thinking with my new class this year started. What kind of life are we living? So this year I teach Journey of Transformation. I have a beautiful class, and they have many questions, more questions than last year, the class last year. So I started with them from this. What kind of life are we living? What kind of life do we lead? Or what should my life be like? So Cicero recalls a story told about Pythagoras, who once was asked to explain the word philosophy and replied using a simile with the Olympic Games. Pythagoras said that the philosophers are like the people who go to the games just to attend, for the pleasure of attending. So they are called philosophers, as we know, because they do not have the Sophia, the wisdom, but they desire it. So they are the lovers of the wisdom. At the games, there are also other categories of people, such as the athletes who go there to win the competitions, and their aim is glory, and the merchants who go there to sell the products, so their aim is benefit from the selling. These three categories, the athletes, the merchants, and the public, let's say the people, represent in a way three different kinds of life according to their aim: glory, money, or knowledge. So the aim, in a way, gives to the life its meaning, the way the subject behaves and acts, for the good or not, and the specific aim, in Greek is telos, one pursues, gives a specific meaning to life. As Enrico Berti recalls, Aristotle agrees with this distinction between three kinds of life, defining them as the life devoted to pleasure, and so to money, that represents the condition to get it, the life devoted to find honors. It's interesting, bios politikos, right? Politics to honors, but that's another story. And so to power that obtains them, and the bios theoretikos, the life devoted to theoria, to contemplation. Philosophers still now debate the definition of life of contemplation, so I do not enter into the debate right now here, but for the purpose of the talk, I mentioned his distinction for two reasons. First of all, because I think it's extremely interesting to analyze one's life starting from a reflection on the overall aim one intends to pursue, since it is one purpose that directs one's actions. Second, because there is a resulting question that is a question worth asking, I think. Which is the kind of life that one should prefer among the others? Which is the kind of life that one should prefer among the others? Aristotle defines it as the bios airetotatos, so the kind of life that is connected with what we call eudaimonia, happiness. Even if the translation of this Greek word does not include all the meanings of the concept eudaimonia, that etymologically means eu, so you would be in English, sorry, good, and daimon, that you understand in English as well, in the sense then that, and I checked the definition, one is born under a lucky star, as if the fate, the destiny of the subject is related and in the hands of the gods. Nevertheless, this is not the meaning of eudaimonia, of happiness, for the philosophers, who suggest that the subject plays a part in her own destiny. And I quote Berti on this. It depends on the choice of the subject, on her own decision of act well, eupratein, therefore to live well. So I act well and I live well. Nevertheless, this meaning of happiness is different from the modern one, Berti says. According to the modern one, happiness is associated to the state of mind, to a feeling of well-being, to the satisfaction of all desires, to the realization of one's own preferences, to the worldly success, end quote. But according to the Greeks, particularly to Aristotle, happiness, eudaimonia, concerns a life as a whole, not just a segment of it. And as Berti points out, it consists of the achievement of the aim of an entire life, the telos, the final aim of an entire life. Furthermore, happiness is expressed in a specific kind of life, what Aristotle calls the bios airetotatos, so the life that one should prefer above all others. And happiness is also associated to the telos, the final aim, that is, and I quote Berti again, that is the aim that is not a mean towards something else, but it is that something towards which all things are means. So for that reason, to summarize, happiness concerns a life as a whole, as the achievement of the aim that is the purpose of an entire life. And it corresponds with a specific kind of life, what, as I said, Aristotle calls bios airetotatos, that is the life one would prefer above all else. It is in the Nicomachean Ethics, book first, that Aristotle affirms, every art and every inquiry, and similarly every action and choice, is thought to aim at some good. So whatever we do aims at some good. For this reason, the good has rightly been declared to be that at which all things aim. That at which all things aim. Whatever the subject does, it aims at an end that is something good for us, or something we consider good. There are different ends among which we choose, but there is also the final end, the final good, the one that is worthy pursuing as desirable in itself and never for the sake of something else, as Aristotle underlines. And this, according to him, is happiness. And I quote again, now, such a thing as happiness, above all else, is held to be. For this we choose always for itself and never for the sake of something else. But, and he gives us examples, honor, pleasure, reason, even every virtue we choose, indeed from themselves, but we choose them also for the sake of happiness, judging that through them we shall be happy. Happiness, on the other hand, no one chooses for the sake of these, nor in general for anything other than itself. End quote. So basically, happiness as a final good is self-sufficient, is the end of our action. But Aristotle does not intend a self-sufficiency just for the individual. This is very interesting for us today, I think, because he intends this in relation to all the people around the subject. Parents, children, friends, fellow citizens. And this is a very famous quote. Since man is born for citizenship, Aristotle says. So we're not born to be alone. I mention this to stress the fact that this account of happiness indicates a kind of life that concerns one's whole life, one's all relations in the community. And so this concerns education as well, because we educate the individual who is in a class, the subject who belongs in the community. Now okay, this is a very long quote. I'm not going to read all the quote. Just I I decided to put all there just to follow Aristotle reasoning. But basically, it takes a step forward, saying, okay, now we know that everything we do aims at some good. Okay, how do we know which kind of life would be the best life for us as human beings? How can we decide that? What is the thing that defines us as human beings and differentiates us from animals and other objects? You know, he says the function of man is an activity of soul which follows or implies reason. Logos in Greek, right? The function of man is an activity of soul which follows or implies reason. And then I go here. The function of man, we state that the function of man to be a certain kind of life. This to be an activity or actions of the soul implying a rational principle. The function of a good man to be good and noble performance of these. And if any action is well performed, when it is performed in accordance with the appropriate virtue. If this is the case, human good turns out to be activity of soul exhibiting virtue. Human good turns out to be activity of soul exhibiting virtue. If there are more than one virtue in accordance with the best and most complete. But human good turns out to be an activity of the soul exhibiting virtue in a complete life. For, he says, one swallow does not make a summer, nor does one day. And so too, one day or a short time does not make a man blessed and happy. Makarion kai eudaimona in Greek. So this is just to say, because Aristotle at this point of his reasoning basically underlines the ergon, the specific function of the subject, that is acting for a certain kind of life, activity or action of the soul implying a rational principle. And he underlines that the function of a good man is the good and noble performance of these, that every action is realized in accordance with the appropriate virtue, since with every action we intend to achieve some good. And Aristotle affirms human good turns out to be an activity of the soul exhibiting virtue. And again, in accordance with the best and most complete virtue and in a complete life. So now the hard part is almost over. Now we turn to Lonergan for a moment and then Maritain, so everybody will be happier, me included. Sorry, but I hope it was clear enough. If not, then in the discussion we can go back to this. So my idea was just to say this. It's very easy. It's very easy for the modern, for our contemporary time to say, I am happy when I feel so and so, when I achieved so and so, as Berti points out, right? But in the ancient time, at least for the Greeks, not just for Aristotle, happiness was related to the aim of our life, to the purpose of our life. So what kind of purpose do we have as human beings? Since we have logos, according to what I understand of Aristotle, okay, I hope there's no experts online or here to tell me that I'm wrong, but that's fine. I'm open to that. But from what I understood, the more I exercise my reason according to the best virtue, the better. So my life will be the best life I can choose for me as a human being, because I will do something that is, in a way, reasonable. This is very much Lonergan. Sorry, I see Lonergan everywhere. At this point, I see Lonergan everywhere. That's good, right? Hopefully. So for this reason, just to conclude this section, happiness is the realization in the most perfect way of the specific function of the subject, that is, the act of the soul according to virtue that only can lead to happiness in a complete life. As Aristotle points out, it is the work of a whole life. And so let's move on to my favorite. I shouldn't have said that, right? Because I'm recorded, but that's fine. So let's move on. It is possible, I think, to find the same attention to the subject's life as a whole in Lonergan's notion of authenticity. So I just introduce the concept here, and you might be familiar with some quotes from Method in Theology in particular. Then the concept will be developed more in the other section of the presentation. But just I want to show the correlation with the notion of happiness I've just outlined. So in method in theology, Lonergan affirms that authenticity is achieved in self-transcendence. That is never some pure and serene and secure possession. So we can be already depressed at this point. It is always a withdrawal from unauthenticity. This is obscure. Human authenticity, this is easier, promotes progress, and human unauthenticity generates decline. And again, human authenticity is not some pure quality, some serene freedom from all oversight, all misunderstanding, all mistakes, or sins. Rather, it consists in a withdrawal from unauthenticity that we know, and the withdrawal is never a permanent achievement, ever precarious, ever to be achieved afresh, ever in a great part of matter of uncovering still more oversights, acknowledging still further failures to understand, correcting still more mistakes, repenting more and more deeply hidden sins. This is part of the definition from method. Then, in the post-method article, Dialectic of Authority, he also affirms, authenticity is reached only by long and sustained fidelity to the transcendental precepts. It exists only as a cumulative product. Moreover, authenticity in man or woman is ever precarious. So in method, he just says, he says it's is achieved in self-transcendence, never pure and serene and secure possession, withdrawal from authenticity, promote progress, not some pure quality, some serene freedom from oversight, misunderstanding, mistakes. But we don't know from these quotes what does it mean. Here it's clearer, I think. He says, is reached only by long and sustained fidelity to the transcendental precepts that we know are be attentive, be intelligent, reasonable, and responsible. As by Brian Brahman recalls, saying authenticity is a lifelong commitment. See, the work of an entire life, of a life as a whole. Authenticity is a lifelong commitment, individually and culturally, related to cosmopolis, related to community, to the imperatives of being attentive, intelligent, reasonable, responsible. In short, Brahman says, authenticity is a life that is intelligent, moral, and religious. It is properly a human way of life. Why does this concern education? Because this is the problem now. So I summarize the account of happiness outlined very briefly, outlined by Aristotle in his Nicomachean Ethics. I just quoted here and there, let's say, underlying that happiness, eudaimonia, is related to the specific function of the subject, her own realizing the action of the soul according to virtue, and so choosing the kind of life that is worthy the most above others. This concerns a whole life, not just a portion of it. And the same idea, I believe, is underneath Lonergan's account of authenticity that I have just briefly sketched. The way towards authenticity is the path of one's whole life, of one's own life. Now I turn to the pedagogical issue. How could this be relevant for education? Could we, as instructors, professors, adults, show, guide, teach the students how to become authentic and happy in Aristotle's concept, through learning, through expanding their own horizons? I believe this is not just a possibility, but a calling for all of us who work in education, even if our job would stop at a certain point, when the subject reaches what Lonergan in Method in Theology calls existential discovery, and later on also he defines it existential moment. The existential discovery, and I apologize because there are a couple of lines of the quote missing. I don't know why, but the quote says as follows: "Is the discovery of oneself as a moral being, the realization that one not only chooses between courses of action, but also thereby makes oneself an authentic human being or an unauthentic one. With that discovery, there emerges in consciousness the significance of personal value and the meaning of personal responsibility." So I read that again, and I ask you to think about your own students in this moment. The discovery of oneself as a moral being, the realization that one not only chooses between courses of action, but also thereby makes oneself authentic human being or an unauthentic one. And with that discovery, there emerges in consciousness the significance of personal value, the significance of personal value, and the meaning of personal responsibility. They have a value, but they have also responsibility. We respect their value, but they help them in being responsible. So, until the students reach that existential moment, this is the second section, it will be quicker. The task, I think, of instructors, teachers, professors is clear. At this point, I should clarify the aims, the final end of education. And I already mentioned Piero Viotto, who says that the purpose of education is the purpose of life, adding also the purpose of education is the person, because a human being becomes a human being only through education. This is how he introduced Jacques Maritain reflection on education. We can we can affirm that Maritain is also a philosopher of education because he considers the contents, the aims, the framework of the educational process more than the methodologies in a way, suggesting what he calls a liberal education for all. So the question I might have for you all today is still the person at the core of education today? Is the person the aim of education today? I believe Maritain's contribution on education in its genesis can be found in his spiritual path, in his intellectual vocation, alongside with his wife Raisa and the sister-in-law Vera, as witness of Christian philosophy in the contemporary society. He had this idea of the necessity of building a pedagogy for the future that involves all the person and all the people, all the community in an ongoing effort for renewal. So I'm using, let's say, I reflect today on his writing Education at the Crossroads. Education at the Crossroads is a little volume that where basically he published the 30 lectures he gave in 1943 at Yale University. So his lectures on education from 1943 at Yale. These lectures were, in a way, the first development of his vision on education. But I think they're very interesting, but also very moving in a way if you put them into context. So the war was not ended, and he is very concerned about the future of Europe and of the world and the future of education. And he just says, and I quote, "The word education has a triple yet intermingled connotation. Easy refers either to any process whatsoever by means of which man is shaped and led toward fulfillment, education in its broadest sense, or to the task of formation, which adults intentionally undertake with regard to youth, or in its strictest sense, to the special task of schools and universities." End quote. So it's interesting to me that in the Italian translation, the word fulfillment, when he says, the whatsoever by means of which man is shaped and led toward fulfillment, so education in the broadest sense, in Italian is translated as perfection. So instead of having fulfillment, we have perfection. And I point out this because this reminds me about what Aristotle says on of the kind of life one wants to lead, the necessity of reaching the perfection in a way, and the role of education in guiding the subject to achieve that perfection, that fulfillment, that acting of the soul in accordance with the best and most complete virtue. So education is complex, involves different actors, so to speak, we know that. But at the center of the educational process, there is the subject who is educating and who is complex as well and has to be considered also in his own historical development. Then there is another aspect that Maritain underlines. Man is not merely an animal of nature, like a skylark or a bear. He's also an animal of culture. And here always think about Lonergan and Cosmopolis. Sorry about that. Whose race can subsist only with the development of society and civilization. He is an historical animal. Hence the multiplicity cultural or ethico-historical patterns into which man is diversified, hence too the essential importance of education. And then this is the most, to me at least, this is the most important section of the quote. Due to the very fact that he is endowed with a knowing power, which is unlimited, and which nonetheless only advances step by step. So we have a knowing power, unlimited, that advances step by step. But man, so the subject, cannot progress in his own specific life, both intellectually and morally, without being helped by the collective experience previously accumulated and preserved, and by a regular transmission of acquired knowledge. So this knowing power that is unlimited and advances step by step cannot progress without tradition and without institution. Without tradition and without institution. The collective experience previously accumulated and regular transmission of acquired knowledge. The relation between the subject who is educated and the society, the tradition in the society, the institution that the society builds up, and the society where the subject belongs, is fundamental not only for the subject's development itself, but also for the progress of society, as Maritain then points out, saying, in order to reach self-determination for which he is made, he needs discipline and tradition. Again, tradition, institution, but he underlines also discipline. Not sure our students would love that, but rules are rules. So discipline and tradition will both weigh heavily on him and strengthen him so as to enable him to struggle against them, which will enrich that very tradition, and the tradition will make possible new struggles and so forth. This quote resonates with me while I was thinking about what Lonergan says in Topics in Education, the intellectual crisis of adolescent. But I couldn't expand more, otherwise we would have needed like 3 hours for the talk. So I don't go there. But just to say that what struck me is that Maritain, as Lonergan and many others, and Newman, first of all, because he died earlier than them, they always point out this, the centrality of the subject, the importance of tradition, of the community, of discipline, but in the centrality of the subject, they also underline their crisis, the intellectual crisis they have to go through. Without the crisis, they will never become adults. In a way, they will never develop the critical thinking. They will just be passive, like recipient of the knowledge we give them. And to me, it was very interesting that Maritain was pointing out the same concept. So again, there is another thing I would like to underline. There is a difference in the Italian translation that to express in order to reach self-determination, in Italian sounds like in order to reach this freedom through which she realizes herself in actuality. More complicated. Sorry about my translation from the Italian, but the idea is that in our translation, the concept of freedom is underlined. That I'm not sure the word self-determination includes so clearly. So you will tell me. That's interesting to me. In order to reach the freedom through which the subject realizes herself. And in realizing, in the Italian version sounds like the actuality. So in potency and in act. Going back to Aristotle again. So this is just to say that the concept of freedom to me here highlights the power of the subject in regarding her own learning path and process alongside with the correlation to her own becoming as a subject. Furthermore, as I said, tradition and discipline are extremely important in the educational process. Tradition is transmitted as the cultural heritage of the community, where the subject grows and develops her own self, and the discipline is a foundational element that in a way supports the subject's learning process and intellectual and moral development. So at this point, a question arises. What is the essence of education? Which are its aims, according to Maritain? So Maritain affirms that among the aims of education, there is the liberation of the human person, the making the subject, the shape the man. And I quote, "It is to guide man in the evolving dynamism through which he shapes himself as a human person, armed, and I underline this, with knowledge, strength of judgment, and moral virtues, while at the same time conveying to him the spiritual heritage of the nation and of the civilization in which he is involved, preserving in this way the century-old achievements of generation. So in underlying the essence and aims of education, is very clear. We need knowledge, strength of judgment, and moral virtues all together, along with the spiritual heritage, not just tradition. He talks about the spiritual heritage of the nation and of the civilization. He's saying this in 1943. He had to escape Europe and move to the United States with his wife and his sister-in-law. So he also adds, for the sake of the new civilization we are fighting for, it is more than ever necessary that education be the education of men, education for freedom, the formation of free men for a free commonwealth. For the sake of the new civilization we are fighting for. Are we fighting for something now or we are good? This is the question. So it is through knowledge, through the formation of the ability to judge, the development of moral virtues that is possible to guide the subject through the evolving dynamism that is the characteristic of the developing subject of the human being. And there is another Italian scholar who really, I think, captures what Maritain has in mind. Rigobello says, pivotal to paideia, so to education in the Greek sense, is the education of intelligence. But education of intelligence, according to Rigobello, is not just the exercise of logical skill, the technique of thinking. It means, above all, a reverent openness to the logos, to the reason, and consistent inferred attitude of consciousness that the presence of the logos of reason activates in each consciousness by opening it to contemplation. Education, therefore, to homage and sacrifice for truth. Openness to logos, openness to reason that basically leads us, activates in each consciousness an openness to contemplation. Sacrifice and truth, education of the intelligence. So this is very clear, reaching the truth, not just what I think, what I feel. This is what Lonergan also will point out very clearly. And I believe that the reverent openness to the logos, to reason, has to be a characteristic of every pedagogical approach, because every instructor guides students towards the acquisition and to the deepening of their own ability of judgment. There should not be passive acquisition of the contents, rather autonomous reasoning. And according to Maritain, it is only through the attention to intelligence and the love for the truth that it is possible to guide the student in reaching, in conquering her own internal and spiritual freedom, or in other words, his liberation through knowledge and wisdom, goodwill and love. So conquering this internal freedom, along with critical thinking and the ability to make significant and responsible choices for one's life, represent essential aims in education. And furthermore, it should be said that according to Maritain, not everything can be taught at school or at university, since there is also the great influence of what he calls the extra educational sphere. Am I good with the time, Matt? Or yeah, okay. So I can read this passage as well. And he says, this is very interesting, I think. He says, well, this extra educational sphere is the entire field of human activity. Let's think about, if I think about my students here, I see them like 3 hours per week. How much do we see them? A little bit. What about all the experiences they have outside? And Maritain underlines this, saying, well, I mean, everyday work and pain, hard experiences in friendship and love, social custom, law, the common wisdom embodied in the behavior of the people, the inspiring radiance of art and poetry, the penetrating influence of religious feasts and liturgy. All this extra educational sphere exerts on man an action which is more important in the achievement of his education itself. This, though, resonates with the idea of education of the whole person, where whole does not mean only the unity of the subject in its entirety of spirit, mind, and body, but concerns also one's own life in the community and the given tradition. So, for all these reasons, and I think this is the news of Maritain's philosophy of education, because Maritain's philosophy of education calls for an integral education. As he says, 1943, if mankind overcomes the terrible threats of slavery and dehumanization which it faces today, it will thirst for new humanism and be eager to rediscover the integrity of man and to avoid the cleavages from which the preceding age suffered so much. To correspond to this integral humanism, there should be an integral education. So this, as I said, was in 1943 when the Second World War was not ended yet. But reading these words today makes me think that in our contemporary times, we live new threats and dehumanization. We might experience this thirst for a new humanism that calls for an integral education. In Maritain's view, an integral education is an education of tomorrow, for tomorrow, that would develop a profound sense of freedom and of responsibility in the subject, along with, as he says, human rights, human obligations, the courage to take risks and exert authority for the general welfare and the respect for humanity of each individual person. An integral education that presents a genuinely democratic character that will be able to respond to the thirst for new humanism. How? By building what Maritain calls a personalistic and communal civilization, grounded on human rights and satisfying the social aspirations and needs of man. So this is what he was hoping for in 1943, an integral education, with these characteristics, developing a profound sense of freedom, responsibility, human rights, the courage to take risks, and so on and so forth, democratic character, and so on. Perfect. Let's move on, my friend Lonergan. Can I call my friend now, right? So all this reflection, very profound and inspiring, but might, if we think about our students, might clash a little bit with the reality of our everyday experience, sounding maybe, I've been told, a little too abstract or even romantic. Nevertheless, along with the Maritain's hopeful vision on education, Lonergan, as usual, comes out to our assistance and drives us back to the first certainty that moves our learning, that is the desire to know. How does he define the desire to know in insight? He says, well, it is pure, disinterested, detached, unrestricted. He gives an outline of the concepts, especially in insight, saying that by the desire to know is meant the dynamic orientation manifested by questions for intelligence and for reflection. So we have in our own beings this dynamic orientation that manifests itself by the questioning for intelligence and for reflection. The questions we ask to organize the data we gather, and the questions we ask to understand. And he also affirms, and this is the quote you have on the PowerPoint, the desire to know, we can go slow on this because it's intense. The desire to know is simply the inquiring and critical spirit of man. By moving him to seek understanding, it prevents him from being content with the mere flow of outer and inner experience. So first of all, Lonergan says we seek understanding. We are not content with what we experience, and that's it. By demanding adequate understanding, we have to be sure of what we think we understood. The desire to know, it involves man in the self-correcting process of learning, in which further questions yield complementary insights. So basically, we move on. We ask even more questions until we reach a point where we don't need to ask any questions because we know. By moving men to reflect, to seek the unconditioned, and so on and so forth, the desire to know, it prevents the subject from being content with hearsay and legend, with unverified hypotheses and untested theories. I'm going to give an example, very nice one, I think. So finally, by raising still further questions for intelligence and reflection, it excluded complacent inertia. For if the questions go unanswered, man cannot be complacent. And if answers are sought, man is not inert. Fine. So the desire to know moves the subject to seek understanding. So she's not content with just what she experiences, but she seeks more. And in looking for more, she demands adequate understanding, so raises many more questions. This, Lonergan says, prevent the subject to settle for unverified hypotheses, legends, hearsays, and so on. I give an example. Let's imagine a person, we are in the department, right? We are in the university, and the person shares with us some news, let's say a gossip, about a colleague who's supposed to have maybe stolen a package of pencils and blue books from the offices. If this was true, of course, it would be a problem, right? But this right now, this is just a hearsay because we don't have enough evidence. What should we do? We should ask questions. Did the person who's telling us the story actually see the colleague with the package? Yes. Was the colleague leaving the storage room of the building? No. The colleague was leaving her own office. Has the person who's telling us the story asked the colleague if she was going to have an in-class exam with the students? No. Okay, we have the answers we were looking for because we inquired about the story. We were not complacent. We were not inert because we needed to know more in order to understand. Lonergan underlines that we ask questions because of the desire to know, but in order to get answers, we need inquiring and reflecting. Another question arises at this point. What if we don't ask these questions? We might grow suspicious and think that the colleague did something unprofessional, and then the decline process starts. Could we trust this person again? Or not? Or you never know. How do you know? So this is it's a simple example. We could apply this framework to every situation, of course, we face in our life. Think about when you read news online, you have to verify the sources, right? And first of all, you have to think if what you are reading makes sense. It's like, just to say one quick thing, I used to have a subscription for an Italian website, a newspaper website. And it's like reading some gossip now. I don't know why. It's changed so much that it's not a newspaper anymore. And I was thinking, I don't need that. I want to know things in order to understand better, since I'm here, what's going on in Europe. But I'm not interested in, the life of this actor or this actress or this influencer and TikTok problem and whatever. It could be like entertaining, like 5 minutes from time to time, but cannot be the front page of the national newspaper. It's insane, right? Sorry, the Italian attitude comes out. I'm sorry, but this is true. And later on, when I will not be recorded, I will tell you which newspaper is, because they offer a subscription with an American newspaper as well. So you pay one and you have two, but I'm not going to tell you now. No, this is you yes, you can guess. Yeah. So the desire to know, sorry, let's go back to Lonergan. The desire to know urges us to find the truth, to find what Elizabeth Snedden calls the correctness of the content. Furthermore, Lonergan affirms that the desire to know is different from all the other desires. Desires a human being's experiences, since the desire to know, again, is pure, detached, disinterested, unrestricted. And I quote, because I know Lonergan sounds difficult in insight, but I think there's no better words to describe what he says. So I just quote, then we can try to understand more. He says, the desire to know is different. It is impalpable but powerful. And this is very interesting to me. It pulls men out of the solid routine of perception and cognition, instinct and habit, doing and enjoying. It holds him with the fascination of problems. Think about when you have to solve a problem. Engages him in the quest of solutions. It is the absorption of the investigation, the joy of discovery, the assurance of judgment, the modesty of limited knowledge. It is the relentless serenity, the unhurried determination, the imperturbable drive of question following oppositely on question in the genesis of truth. The desire to know is powerful because it pushes the subject out of what Lonergan calls solid routine, that could also be defined, I think, as comfort zone of experiencing and thinking. Because thinking, inquiring, seeking understanding is tough. It requires a lot of energy. So sometimes I look at the newspaper, journal online. I said, okay, fine. I don't need to know more. I don't want to know more because I'm exhausted, right? But that's tricky. That's a danger. That is dangerous if we keep doing all the time, right? So the subject, Lonergan says, is absorbed in the inquiry experiences joy of discovery and finds oneself serene and determined while relentless and unhurried in her own quest. Pure, so this is just a summary, is pure. The pure desire to know wants to know what is to be known, not what I think it might look like, real and true. At the beginning, the desire to know, the pure desire to know, is a dynamic orientation to a totally unknown. So I want to know what is to be known. It wants to know what is to be known, not what I think it might look like, real and true. It is disinterested, meaning that through it, the subject does not look for her own satisfaction, but again, for a correctness of the content. It is disinterested, so Lonergan says in Insight, is independent of the individual's likes and dislikes, of his wishful and anxious thinking. Independent of what we like or dislike. This should be, at least, we should follow it. It is detached, meaning that it is opposed to the inhibition of cognitional process that arise from other human desires and drives. It is detached. I want to know what is to know, even if I don't like it, even if my desire would be different. Think about grading papers. You desire something different, but then you have to face reality. Not all the papers are like what you were expecting. Just to remind you, some of my students still think that, and it's my fault, I think, it was Abraham who received the 10 Commandments, because they didn't pay attention to the lesson and to the reading. I mean, it was an easy thing, but that's fine. So just to say, I tried to be detached in my understanding of what they were saying. So if our desire to know, Lonergan says, is not detached, and we consciously or not, this is key, if we consciously or not block the questions which will lead to unwanted answers, our understanding and so our decisions will be biased and unreliable. The desire to know is powerful and we want to know, but sometimes the truth of reality could be very hard to face and accept. Or simply we should admit that we were wrong in a specific circumstance, so we don't ask the right questions. We try to demonstrate we are right. Let's think about the example I gave you a couple of minutes ago. The person telling us a colleague left her office with a package of blue books and pencils. After a few questions, we find out that we actually don't know the reason why she had the package. And in front of such little evidence, we cannot accuse her of anything. Nevertheless, the person who told us the story insists with her own version of the story, refuses to ask other questions to herself and, more important, to the colleague. So we decide to do it. Why not? And we have the opportunity to meet with the colleague and ask the questions as, hello, have you scheduled in class writing examination with your class this year? Just to, give me advice on that. She says, yes. We ask, have you used blue books or different material? And she says, oh, yes, I used the blue books. And last week I received a new package with all the material. She might add, leaving my office, I also met our colleagues XYZ. And I was wondering if you met him recently, since I want to discuss with you all a new project and I would love to find a time to do so together. End of the story. Of course, I keep it short, right? And the conclusion could be completely different. But the point I want to prove here is this. Through a dialogue, better through some specific questions, we were able to find out the truth of the hearsay we were told. Now, the big question is why the other colleague refused to do so? Then every scenario is possible, right? But think about the situation. I didn't ask the questions, so I don't know the truth, and I grow more suspicious. And then I don't know if the colleague told me this because he doesn't want me to work with this other person in this project, so I can cut out of the situation, and I hope can't have a say in the money that the department has, and so on and so forth. So from a small and very, sorry about the word, stupid thing, we can have a huge problem. And I don't know if it's insane what I'm saying, but it might not be so insane, because I always remember with the praxis group this year, we were, I think last meeting, we were talking about the importance of communication. So communication is dialogue, is asking questions in order to reach the truth, to know what's going on. Otherwise, if we don't have a conversation about things, we might stay in our ivory towers, think we are right, the other is wrong, and there's no collaboration again or anymore. That might be a problem. The possibility is that the other person was biased, Lonergan would say. So in his refusing to ask him more questions, he repressed insights and didn't reach a correct understanding. This is the problem. So this is no moral, there's no moral judgment here. It's just the coming out of the situation. I mean, the end of the situation. Bias is a real danger, not just for individuals, but for communities, because bias fosters decline in society. So we have progress, according to Lonergan, as we know, progress, decline, and redemption. So this is a way how decline starts. The problem is that in doing so, our colleague, but it can happen to every one of us, every subject who does it in a way does not give free reins in a way to the desire to know as unrestricted. Because even if, as Nedden underlines, human capacity to understand is not unrestricted, the desire is prior to understanding. And simply as desire, it is orientation to the totality of being. We want to know. Why should we be content otherwise? So I know the example I gave is not strictly related to education, but I think it concerns in a way education, because the person we want to become, the way we guide our students. How do we foster students' desire to know if we block the questioning we have because we don't want to know more, or because we don't want to be involved in a more complex and difficult conversation? Think about the example. Are we able not to block the wrong questions in any way? And for the students were supposed to be here, so this was for them, but that's fine. For the students we have been in the past, what do we find fascinating still in what we study? Why did we choose to major in nursing instead of business, or literature instead of medical school, or whatever? What did we desire to know? What do we desire to know still now? Is our desire to know pure, detached, disinterested, and unrestricted, as Lonergan outlines? Or do we not pay attention to this? Because the problem Lonergan underlines, and again is clear, if we block the questions, we might reach the wrong answers. And so a biased understanding of things and situations and what would happen to our actions. So this is the topic of the next sections of my presentation. Will be quicker. The correlation between the desire to know and becoming an authentic subject. I don't recall Lonergan's definition of authenticity I gave at the beginning, but by reflecting upon another issue but I would like to reflect upon another issue we have to face in education today that is very much related to this, I think. So after considering this beautiful account and profound account of the desire to know that Lonergan outlines in Insight and all the considerations we had, one would ask why our students keep using AI for their assignments instead of developing their own ideas and thoughts. And how do we deal with it? Is possible to find a solution through rules only, just forbidding it? We might try. For sure, we should keep stating in the syllabi along with the conversation with the students themselves upon the issue. But nevertheless, there is more. Educating between knowledge and ethics, or better, educating between the desire to know and authenticity. Becoming authentic subjects might be part of a solution. So we ask ourselves some basic questions. Why should I want to become an authentic subject? Thinking about the student. What am I going to gain in a way? Who is an authentic subject? So for sure, she's a converted, according to Lonergan, right? Towards the truth, the good, and overwhelmed by the love of God. Hence, an authentic subject should be a happy subject, but in the sense of the happiness I described recalling Aristotle. In fact, authenticity, as Lonergan says in Method in Theology, is achieved in self-transcendence. It comes through dispositions, deliberations, actions, never a definitive achievement, never a secure possession. It is the work of a life. In order to start this work of a life, the subject follows the urge of the desire to know and starts asking questions. And it is in the autonomous human subject, that self-transcendence occurs, Lonergan says. Self-transcendence, that is also the necessity that the subject experiences of transcending oneself, fight, in a way, one's own egotism, self-interest, seeking something bigger, more relevant, more fulfilling. The subject's capacity for self-transcendence is constituted by questions for intelligence, reflection, and for deliberation. So we start from the desire to know. Then we move on because thanks to the desire to know, we ask questions for intelligence, for reflection, and for deliberation. But it is through the questions for deliberation that self-transcendence becomes moral and so concerns actions. Since we ask if one thing is worthwhile, is this thing worthwhile? Is this thing truly good? We inquire about objective value. Lonergan, I think, as usual, is crystal clear. He says, and I quote, that moral self-transcendence is the possibility of benevolence and beneficence, of honest collaboration and true love, of swinging completely out of the habitat of an animal and of becoming a person in a human society. So through moral self-transcendence, we do everything that Lonergan is stating here. This is the path towards authenticity. It starts again with the desire to know, as Naden points out, enables our human flourishing. And through all the different kinds of questions we ask, and as Lonergan outlines, in the measure we follow these precepts, and I quote, in the measure we fulfill these conditions of being a human person, we also achieve self-transcendence, where both in the field of of knowledge and in the field of action. So the more we follow the precepts, be attentive, intelligent, reasonable, responsible, the more we follow in a way the desire to know, and so try to reply to the questions and reach the moral self-transcendence, we achieve this self-transcendence both in the field of knowledge and in the field of action. And as we know, we achieve authenticity in self-transcendence. So how is this related to education? I think that this path towards authenticity has to be shown before being taught or even explained, because the students have to get inspiration from those who guide them. Otherwise, as John Henry Newman said, the institution becomes an Arctic winter and not a living and dynamic reality. I think this calls for a responsible attitude from all the adults involved in education, all the adults of the community, since we are all responsible in guiding the young people. We don't tell them what to do, but we help them how to be attentive, intelligent, reasonable, letting them their own freedom to act and choose the responsible courses of actions. Therefore, I believe that our responsibility, as I said already, ends when in a way when they reach their existential moment and they understand the power of their own being human and the possibility of deciding for themselves what to make of themselves. This should work with the example of AI, hopefully. Well, let's say students might keep using it, but at a certain point, reaching this existential moment, they should have the honesty, as Lonergan would say, of looking in the mirror and recognize that this is wrong, that will not improve their learning process, their ability of thinking, and so one day they might not be really capable of judging for themselves what is good for themselves, because they would not know what is good. So I think education holds in itself the paradox and the challenge of freedom, that is the freedom of the other human being, the freedom of the otherness, who's given to me, whom I cannot control, but whom I can guide for a little while on the path of learning and discovering reality. So I move to a conclusion, promise. This is the last part. So okay. Authentic happiness. No, I didn't switch because I don't want to spoil the last slide. It's a surprise. So we talk about authentic happiness, educating between knowledge and ethics. I started recalling Aristotle very briefly, Aristotle's account of happiness in the Nicomachean Ethics, and the concept of happiness as the work of an entire life, as the perfect realization in a complete life of the subject ergon, the subject's own specific function, that is, according to Aristotle, an activity of the soul which follows or implies reason. This notion resonates with Lonergan's account of authenticity, that despite being never a secure possession, is achieved by the subject in self-transcendence, and again, it is a human way of life, the work of our life. I believe Maritain's reflection on education supports the claim of education as a possibility of authentic happiness, since Maritain underlines the necessity of educating the intelligence to reach the truth, shaping the subject, fostering education towards freedom, in a society that experiences a thirst for a new humanism, where an integral education for an integral humanism is needed to build a society that becomes a community. Educating the intelligence needs a framework that is suggested, of course, by Lonergan, I think, starting from the desire to know, asking questions, and through deliberations and actions, the subject can achieve self-transcendence and so authenticity. This is how we educate the whole person, guiding the students towards the discovery of that existential moment that represents a pivotal change in their own lives. It is through this path of experiencing, understanding, judging, and deciding and loving that in a lifetime, in a complete life, Aristotle would say, they can build an authentic happiness. And I would like to conclude with these words that Maritain addresses to the students at his lectures at Yale. I think these words represent to me a call for self-transcendence in Lonergan's sense. He says, I think I may appeal confidently to American youth because for a long time I have loved them as well as their great country. I should like to say to them, the world which hungers not only for bread but for the freeing of the word of truth, the world needs you. It asks you to be as courageous in the field of intellect and reason as in the battles of land and sea and air. What your intellect and reason have to win is something which is not to be measured or manipulated by scientific tools, but grasped by the strength of rational insight arising from what your eyes see and your hands touch. A universe of realities which make your thought true by virtue of their very being and not merely as a result of successful action. This is the universe of intelligible being and of the sacred character of truth as such. You will then be able to show the world how human action may be reconciled with and permeated by an ideal which is more real than reality, and why it is possible and right to die for liberty. Thank you.